So if I were to tell you today that I have a Christmas present for every single one of you, but I'm going to give it to you, in 604 years. How would you feel? Excited? Not excited for a Christmas present? In 604 years? I want to remind us, as we look at being included in the Christmas story, there is a room for you this Christmas. There's room for you in the whole plan of God. And that's what we're really emphasizing as we looked at Mary, we looked at Joseph, and now we're going to look at the Magi or the wise men. And that is that God has a plan that is bigger than our life. Again, we're a little bit skewed, and sometimes ministers can make this sound real negative, and there's a negative aspect to it, but I want you to know we're a little bit skewed more than we even want to admit with the idea of consumerism in our things. The gospel of Jesus Christ is not about you. It's not about me. It's about Him. It's only about Him. To God be the glory. To Christ alone be the glory. And you say, well, what about me? Well, that's reflective of your Adamic nature, selfishness. You see, when a child is born, they are the center of the universe, right? They wham, their parents come running. They get a pacifier. Why do you got a pacifier? Because they're very demanding. Here, take this. Be quiet, right? There's a demand there. And so we can sometimes let that slip into our lives, but when we really appreciate it, and we can look at something like a gift 600 years from now and think, well, why would I care? Because what happens in our life today in the divine plan of God does have an impact 600 years from now. And you and I are a part of a story that's bigger than what happens in our life just today. That doesn't mean that God doesn't care about us as individuals. He so loved us that He gave His only begotten Son. God truly cares for us. But it does indicate that what God is doing is bigger than you or me. It's bigger than what's happening in this life right now. It's bigger than what's happening in governments and in the world. And so we're going to go on a journey today to look at the Magi and look at how God is at work even in their life. You ever wonder, why did these guys show up in the Nativity? I don't know if you've seen the movie, it's the classic with Clarence, you know, and every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. I'm not saying it's theologically correct, but it's called It's a Wonderful Life. It's an American classic. If you've never seen it, it's actually clean. I would recommend watching it. And basically, it's this story about this guy who feels like his life is worthless. He goes to take his life, and this challenged angel is assigned to help out George. And if you haven't seen it, I really encourage you to watch it. It's a clean, good old film. And in fact, I would recommend watching the older versions of it just because you'll get the true essence of it. And basically, it's this idea that our life does matter in the divine plan of God. But in Clarence, you kind of have this story. It starts out with this star twinkling and the voice of God. And this conversation between an angelic being, Clarence, who wasn't so angelic, and God Himself. And Clarence, come here. I have something for you to do. It's about a guy named George Bailey and the star twinkles. Do you think that's how the wise men showed up? They were just looking up the sky, and all of a sudden the stars started speaking to them, twinkling. I don't think so. We don't have that recorded in Scripture, but we're going to look at this idea of where did the wise men come, how do they fit in the plan of God, and how did they show up then, really not at the manger, but they showed up sometime later. Yes, the manger scene back here has the wise men, and that is biblically errant because they weren't there at the birth of Christ. The shepherds were there, Mary was there, Joseph was there. Some of the extended family was there, but the wise men showed up sometime later, sometime within the first couple years of his life. And the Bible shows that to us. But as we look at this, I want to draw our attention to, there are really two different narratives in the Gospels. We have Matthew's narrative and we have Luke's narrative about the birth of Jesus Christ. Luke's narrative goes from this theological concept, the Son of Man. In the Gospel of Luke, you will hear the repetition about this idea, the Son of Man. Jesus Christ, that is God in the flesh, Emmanuel with us, fully God, but Luke emphasizes fully man. God in the flesh. And hence, when Luke does the genealogy in that Luke's account, it's not just a bunch of names for you to say, I don't know where these guys fit in the whole story. He's emphasizing that through Mary, through her lineage, she was also distantly, through a different line, related to David. And so in doing so, he's rightfully noting that even if you want to say, all right, Jesus was born of a virgin birth, so he really wasn't related to Joseph because Joseph was not involved in that picture. It was the Holy Spirit that conceived. So that everyone might know that even if you make that deduction, which the Bible claims is the account, there's still the rightful heir to the throne through Mary herself. Now, Luke's gospel focuses on Jesus, the Son of Man. And we see the lowliness, the nativity scene. We see the angelic beings showing up and speaking to the shepherds in the fields. We see the shepherds that do show up at the nativity scene there and meet this babe wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in the manger. But Matthew's gospel goes from the angle of his rightful kingship through his father's lineage, who, as you want to get technical, saying his stepfather because Jesus was conceived of the Holy Spirit, Joseph's line. And Luke is the physician looking at the more technical aspects of pregnancy, noting those things. Matthew, he's a tax collector. He's he's an accountant. He looks at the technical aspects of it, not through the natural of the woman carrying it, but through the lineage, and he gives a genealogy, and we'll come to that in a few weeks here. But as we look at the comparison here, we have something interesting that shows up in Matthew's gospel, and that is Matthew's emphasizing King of Kings, Lord of Lords. So Matthew's gospel includes a picture of not the nativity, but within the first couple years of Jesus' life, a picture of the wise men or magi showing up at the house. And it traces that for us, and Matthew's looking at that, not talking about the shepherds, but talking about the wise men. We see this in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and following. It says this, "And Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod. About the time some of the wise men from the eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking, 'Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him.'" I want you to ask a couple questions about this story. Number one is, how did they know to look for a star? Where did they get this basis? How do we look at this? And so we can see this unfold here. There's some questions here. They came to worship. Now, I want you to note in verse 3, it says, "And King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this, as was everyone in Jerusalem, and he called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of the religious law and asked, 'Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?'" Now, do you see anything odd about this picture? What's odd about this picture, if you might have already made the deduction, is here are strangers coming from the far east, coming to the city of the Jews, the capital, where the temple of the Lord is, coming to the place in the center of worship in Jerusalem, and Judaism is established, and this is the epicenter of it, and these people don't know anything about the Messiah being born. Oh, he knows about who to consult, but he's not up to date with this. And so now you look at this whole story and you begin to see, hey, this has had to be a little puzzling to the Magi who were coming to where they thought the center of this King of the Jews would be born. And the people there is like, I don't know. Wonder how many Christians don't know where Jesus is. Is it possible to lose sight? Someone says to you, How can I worship the Lord? Do you have a ready response? Herod didn't. They've come to worship him. But no one in Jerusalem was looking to worship him. No one in Jerusalem bothered to even know that he was there, alive. So that he consulted the priests, and in verse 5 it says, in Bethlehem in Judea, they said, for this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the ruling cities of Judah, for a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. And Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them that the time the star appeared. Then he told them, go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child. And when you find him, come back and tell me so that I may go and worship him too. Now, we know that Herod is a lot of things. He's a great builder. He built many things in Israel, a lot of things. And many of those edifices stand to this day, or portions of them stand. And so he built those things. But he is not a great person. Herod is a murderous thug. There's no better way to put it. By this point in his history, he's already murdered a lot of his own children. Anybody who was a threat to his throne, he would put to death. Mind you, Herod is a puppet king. He's kind of put there by the Roman Empire, and he's under the Roman Empire. And so he is a puppet king. His children who will succeed him in this, and actually the kingdom after Herod is dead, will end up being split between three of his children. And we'll see by the time Jesus is placed, Pontius Pilate, a Roman, was put there in place as well. And we'll see that picture unfold. But here's Herod. He has no interest in worshiping Jesus, but he has every interest in stamping out Jesus. Why? He sees Jesus as a personal threat. But he's clever enough. He's wise enough. He's got good at lying and deceiving and killing people. So he just says to this, hey, guys, you go search it out. And then come back and report to me. Verse 9, it says, after he interviewed the wise men, he went on the way, and the star that they'd seen in the east guiding them in Bethlehem, it went ahead of them and stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. Isn't it interesting? Herod's filled with terror. Jerusalem is fearful and afraid. But the wise men are filled with joy. You see, when we look for Christ, we will find the joy of the Lord. It will be revealed to us. He will make himself known. If we seek him out, he will make himself known to us. But see, Jerusalem was busy living its life. It had all of its things going on. And yes, it was aware of the Messiah's prophecies and things, but it wasn't looking for the Messiah. I ask you this question today. How about your life? Are you more than just aware of Jesus Christ? Are you actively looking for Christ in your life? Are you actively paying attention? Because life demands a lot of us. And it's easy to get caught up in the details of everyday living and miss the greater plan of God that is unfolding before us. And that's exactly what happened here in Jerusalem. The greater plan of God was unfolding. But the city that should have been welcoming, the city where the temple to honor the Lord was built, the city was too busy living its daily life to care about the showing up of the Messiah. It was too caught up in those temporal things of life. And so it says they were filled with joy in verse 11. And they entered the house, not the manger, because this is sometime after his birth, and saw the child, not the baby, with his mother, Mary. And they bowed down and worshiped him. And they opened their treasures chest and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now look at the heart of these people who traveled all this distance. They came. You know what the wise men got? They knew how to worship. They show up in Jerusalem. Nobody even knows there's a king been born. Right? So they come. Imagine how dismayed they were. It says Herod and all Jerusalem was disturbed with him. But the Magi traveled all this distance with their large caravan, and they show up in the city that is built to honor the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and nobody in the city seems to know that the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords have shown up. It's kind of like showing up for a birthday party, and whose birthday? You don't even know who it is. Imagine they're distraught when they kind of came to this place in Jerusalem and thinking, we traveled all this ways and nobody seems to care. And then they travel on to Bethlehem because the star leads them there. They travel on, and at this, they don't see a huge palace. They don't see a big king. They don't see a beautiful scenery. They see just a little old common house that has a poor family living in it. But I love what they do. They open the treasure chest and they give these gifts. You know what the wise men understood that the Pharisees and Sadducees didn't understand of that day? Your surroundings have nothing to do with your worship. It's who you adore. It's who you adore. They came seeking the Messiah, the King of the Jews, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They came looking. And when they found him, the music didn't matter. The sermon didn't matter. The heat or the cold didn't matter. The comfort of the pews or the chairs didn't matter. The conveniences of life didn't matter. What mattered is they found him. There would have been so many reasons in the natural to think, wow, we traveled all this way to find a common baby in a poor family and to worship him. But no, when they saw and they knew this is the Lord, this is God at work, they worshiped him with everything. No reserve. They gave of themselves. They gave of their resources. So as we look at this account, we have to look at the whole narrative. What's the plan of God? And today I want to punctuate this idea that you and I are included in the plan of God. And to be an important part of that plan, which we may not fully understand this side of eternity, what we have to do is we have to pursue God. We have to seek him out. We have to seek out his will. We have to seek out his person. And we just need to worship him, to adore him. God has a plan that's bigger than us. You may be wondering in your life, how does the things and events of my daily life matter? They matter to God. And guess what? To his plan they matter. And his plan is bigger than your life. Again, consumerism puts it around, well, what's God do for me? The wise men did not come saying, what would this baby do for us? They came to worship. What can we do for him? How can we honor him? How can we glorify him? And we see that kind of unfold in this account, and it's really a call for you and I to examine our lives and say, how do we live our Christian faith? Is it about what God's doing for us, or is it about what we're going to do for Christ? And how does that work? You see, the bigger plan of God's picture spans beyond our lifetime. The Magi show up at this scene, but as they show up at this scene, it's important to note, why are they showing up here? Why are they even coming? Again, I don't think it's like Clarence in that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, and the star speaks to them. Hey, Magi. Hey, wise men. Flicker, flicker, flicker. Go here. No, the scripture says something unique. It says this star led them. However, the phenomenal working of the Lord, however he did this, in fact, it was pointed out to me, and it's a good point, angels are sometimes referred to as stars. But this bright light, we don't have any recorded conversation happening here. This is probably not your typical star hanging in the sky because it moved ahead of them. And it wasn't just resting over the city of Louisville or the city of Bethlehem. It moved over to the house. There was some clear marker where they were following this thing which was guiding them. But why were they looking to begin with? This is so important because when we see the plan of God is bigger than our own lives, then we can see ourselves being written into it regardless of what happens in our lives. The Christmas story includes us, just as it included the wise men. But guess what? It included people from many, many, many years before. I propose to you more than 600, but about 600 years before, it included people. In fact, there's a prominent person in the Old Testament that is in charge of the Magi. Interestingly enough, the Magi are a mixture of political figure, scientists, and mythological. They were into the, some of them were into the, instead of the study of the stars, the interpretation of what these stars move, the astrology of it instead of the astronomy of it. This is an odd mix of people. They were fairly well educated. They were prominent. They were influential. They had done very well for themselves. But the Bible doesn't leave us wondering where the Magi came from. The Bible tells us, if we'll look, where the Magi came from. It says they came from the east. You know what's to the east? You see, as we look at the timeline in the history of Israel, we see that after Israel comes into being, in the Old Testament, we have this unfolding. We're counting down the clock, okay? We're counting up years now. They were counting down years. We have the kingdom established under Saul in 1050. And then we have David in 1010 becoming the king of Israel. Solomon in 970 becomes the king following his father David. In 962, the temple, the first temple, is built there in Jerusalem. And then we begin to see something happening in 930. The kingdom of Israel is split into Israel and Judah under the leadership of Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So we have this all taking place. Meanwhile, the prophets start rising up. Israel is ignoring God, just like it was when the Magi showed up in Jerusalem. The Israelites are ignoring God, and they are getting into the things of the world. They were getting into things that are strictly forbidden of them to get into, and they were involving themselves in these things. And then we had the prophecy of the Assyrian Empire coming in and conquering, and that's exactly what it did. The Assyrian Empire then comes in, and we see in 900 the beginning of the Assyrian Empire, which begins to invade Israel. That eventually gives way to another empire, which you might be more familiar with. But before it does, we have prophets like Jonah. He hated to go to Nineveh. Why? Because they were Assyrians and they were despicable people. We have Amos in 755. We have Hosea in 750. We have Micah and Isaiah in 730. And as we count down through the years, we see something transpiring here as the hand of God is at work, speaking through the prophets of God. In 628 through 580, we have Jeremiah. And the prophecies are taking place. And then something happens. Israel has been overrun. It's been overrun by its enemies locally and stuff. But a new empire rises to the stage, and that empire is called Babylon. And in 606, Babylon takes away the first captives. All right, Assyria is already going in, and was common with the practice when you conquered a land, you took the most trained and educated people and you brought them back to your land to help them manage that land. And so we now have in 606 people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We have them taken away to Babylon in Babylonian captivity. Eventually, Babylon would fall to the Medes and the Persians. And you have the Medo-Persian Empire. And this will keep rolling through history until you get the whole ways up to where we covered a few weeks ago, where you get to Alexander the Great, who really unifies the world language and sets the stage for the gospel to be spread all around the world. But you see, in that, God is working. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We love their stories. We would never love to have been there because no one wants to be about thrown into the fiery furnace. No one wants to be about thrown into the lion's den. No one wants to be falsely accused. All right? We might like the other things of their life, and we like to read about those stories because we weren't them. But these were not pleasant life experiences. You probably have a few unpleasant life experiences in your own life. Right? Some of them you've already been delivered out of, and some of them you're facing right now, and you're wondering, what's God going to do in this? Surely Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and others carried off had to be wondering, what's God going to do in this? These guys were very young when they were carried off. They were not much unlike Joseph and Mary in age when they were carried off to Babylon. So it's not like they lived a whole big long life of rebellion against God. They were just young teenagers, and they were carried off into captivity. Now, while Deuteronomy tells us and forbids the getting into astrology, the Old Testament tells us that one of the key figures that we hold up was the chief of the Magi. Here's where we see it. Daniel chapter 2, verse 46 and following. It says, "And then the king Nebuchadnezzar threw himself down before Daniel and worshipped him and commanded his people to offer sacrifices of burnt sweet incense before him. And the king said to Daniel, 'Truly, your God is the greatest of gods and Lord over kings, a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this secret.'" So Nebuchadnezzar comes to this place of realization that Daniel's God is the God, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, i.e., the emphasis of the Gospel of Matthew, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Luke's Gospel, Son of Man. And so Matthew writes in the Magi. Why is this very important? Because Matthew's setting the stage for us. He's helping us connect the dots that say what happened in your life today, you may never understand. But it matters in the divine plan of God. And then it says this. In the next verse it says there, "Then the king appointed Daniel to be in a high position and gave him many valuable gifts." Sound familiar? Many valuable gifts. Doesn't that sound very familiar with Matthew? As you keep reading here, it says, "And he made Daniel ruler over the province of Babylon, as well as chief over all his magi," wise men. You wonder why 600 years later, there are guys out there looking for a star, looking for a sign of a Messiah? Why? Because Daniel was put over charge of this group. Now, Daniel, in his upbringing, probably would have bristled at the idea of being over this mixed group of people, some political, some scientists, some into the mysticism and all those types of things, astrology, and this. And yet he was put in charge of the Magi, the wise men. Now, I asked you at the beginning, if you got a gift, but I was going to give it to you 600 years from now, would you take it? Well, I don't really have a gift. I have to say I lied. But God has a gift. God has a gift for you. Your life and what he's doing in your life may matter more than you know 600 years from now. Should the Lord tarry. Daniel was dead and gone. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was dead and gone. But they were included in the Christmas story. And not three wise men, but whatever the caravan was that went to worship Jesus, they were there because of the influence of men carried off into captivity, who refused to become bitter, but required themselves to be men of integrity, people of integrity. And by the way, it doesn't end with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If I read the next verse here, it says in verse 49, it says, "And Daniel requested the king appoint Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be in charge of all the affairs of the province while Daniel remained in the king's court." And these gentlemen become great influencers, but it doesn't stop there. You see, the Babylonian Empire will eventually fall. The Medes and the Persians will rise to power. We'll see that Daniel goes through some of that transition, and the stage will keep changing. But then you'll find somebody called Esther and Mordecai. And they're woven into the story. Why? Because they're continuing to carry the message. A Messiah will be born. Emmanuel will be with us. God is sending a King of Kings who will deliver his people. And hundreds of years later, somebody would come seeking out Christ because of that testimony. You see, you think, well, why should I witness? They're just going to turn me down. Or they turned me down. It was a failure. You don't know what the power of God in 100 years might do with that. You see, you might be written into the Christmas story a whole lot more than you realize. In fact, we are all sitting here because people like Paul and Peter and James and John 2,000 years ago were written into the plan of God. Priscilla and Aquila were written into the plan of God. How are we being written into the plan of God? Your life is not about you, it's about him. That's the point of Christmas. It's about him. We're just in this journey. And we may feel insignificant, we may feel unimportant, we may not be a prominent figure, but by the way, quite honestly, in the world's economy, Daniel was raised to some great power, but yet in the overall economy, he was just part of that for a kingdom for a period of time, and he was still a slave, mind you, always a slave and a eunuch. Wasn't necessarily the most ideal circumstances. We kind of want to make these situations look more glorious than they were. They were not easy. They were not in the easy place. Daniel was in a very tough place, but he was written into the plan of God. How are you? How's your life? Maybe your struggle today is a part of the struggle like that of Mary and Joseph being written into the plan of God. Maybe it's a struggle like the wise men coming and figuring out, why does nobody here know about the Messiah? Why is nobody here worshiping God? Why is nobody? We come to a party and nobody wants to party. We come to celebrate, and nobody seems to even notice anything's going on. How sad it becomes when the children of God, the people of God, don't realize what God is doing in their very midst. Most importantly, that needs to be interpreted on an individual level. Are you willing to recognize that God might be doing something more significant with your life than you know? And are you willing to accept that in your lifetime, you may not know the outcome of it? You see, we are a fast-paced society. We want to go through the drive-thru. We want the drive-thru to take us no more than 29 seconds. If we have to wait there any longer than this, we need another drive-thru. We just drive down the street, right? You can always get in the Arby's. Nobody's there. Sorry if anybody works for Arby's. Go try to get Chick-fil-A. I leave an hour early just to get there before the crowd does. Or just wait until an hour later. You don't go at noon. Why? And they do a fast job, but it's not fast enough when you're hungry, right? See, we want to treat everything in our life like what happens now matters. Well, it matters. What matters is our faithfulness now. The circumstances, the environment, whether we're in a poor situation, whether we're just in a little house with a lowly scenario, that doesn't matter because God's plan is being unfolded. And whether we ever see that in our lifetime is not important either. See, we want everything to happen around us because the center of the universe is us and not Jesus. That's not good. Truly, the essence of Christmas is Christ. What's his plan? What's his story? What's he doing? And what's encouraging about that is I get to be included. I don't know how it's going to unfold. I don't know what it's going to look like. But my simple life gets included. And your life gets included. And the only important thing, the only thing you and I will be judged on is, are we willing? Are we willing to seek him out? Are we willing to say, yes, Lord, as Mary and Joseph? Are we willing to listen to his voice? And we might not see the full fruit of our obedience now. Because it's not about us. It's about him. But it will be worth it all. Can you imagine I don't know. Let me make this very clear. Theologically speaking, I don't know if in heaven they could look down and see us or not. But if they could, I could almost imagine Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego sitting up there when the wise men are showing up, thinking, oh, yes, it was worth it all. 600 years later, they actually listened. I told that family over and over again, and 6 generations later, they finally heard me. I could just see them getting pretty, whoa, look at this. Look at this. They're going after Jesus. Don't you wish your testimony could last that long? Well, it does, if you just surrender to God. I could almost see heaven getting excited. Now, it says, it gives us a little glimpse. We don't know actually how it folds, but all of heaven rejoices when one comes to know Christ, right? Man, when these guys bowed their knees and worshiped Jesus Christ, man, I have to think Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I have to think Esther. I have to think the prophets of old had to be up there thinking, whoa. Daniel's finally saying, now I know why you put me in charge of the Magi. I always thought that was a dumb position. I was almost embarrassed to be in charge of that, but I was just trying to do what I was commanded to do. And yet God used it all those years later. I ask you that question. One is, I want you to know your life matters. What God is doing in your life today, or maybe it feels like he's not doing in your life today, it matters. And there's a bigger picture unfolding before your life. And that's a divine plan. That is the hand of God at work. And it actually might be for somebody else's salvation long after you're gone. Can you believe that our lives matter that much that God would use it? You're here because people who have gone on before us, Peter, James, John, many other believers, because we want to kind of stop at the New Testament. But how do we even get the New Testament in our hands? For thousands of years, men and women of God had to pass it down to share it. They're included in the story. We might not even know their names, but we're here today as a result of their obedience, their willingness to say, I'll follow you, Lord. I won't concern myself with my life. I'll concern myself with you. And we're here today as a result of that. It's exciting to think that somebody, somewhere along the line that I may never even meet or know, I'll meet in heaven. That somehow my life, as mundane and as routine as that may be, had an impact on their life because God has a bigger plan. Your hardship, your struggle, your challenges, your output, it does matter to God, and God is using it. What you do, what you say, how you interact, it does matter to God because he's writing his message through our lives. And we'll get to see some of those fruits right now, but many of those fruits, it's like a seed in the ground. It has to die and go to the ground before it ever will be raised up into newness of life. We're sown in our life and in his plan, great things will happen. Where are you at? Where are you in this journey? There were other prophecies that spoke in Micah chapter 5, verse 2, Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, in Numbers chapter 24, verse 17. We also see over in 2 Chronicles 15, 2. We see this unfolding, this reflection that God was putting something together. And even with those prophecies, there were many people in Jerusalem that missed it. Not everybody, because we haven't talked about Hannah or Simeon. But there were many people in Jerusalem that missed it. Don't miss it. God's engaged in your life. And you're blessed because of that, because Emmanuel, God is with you. And you will be a blessing because of that. Recognize that's a gift. It's a gift you receive from God It's a gift you can leave to others as you walk out your faith and honor him. So the Magi didn't just show up on a random whim. They showed up because 600 years earlier, someone was faithful. It wasn't the same people. They were long dead. But somewhere the message got passed on and repeated and restated, and the influence remained. Should the Lord tarry, may our lives be like that of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I can tell you now, it is his plan to include you in his work. It is his purpose. And even if you don't feel like it, you're included. And that's a blessing. It's an exciting time. And someday, someone is going to bow their knee and confess with their tongue that Jesus Christ is Lord. You may never get to meet them, but your life is a part of the story, a part of the impact. Don't take that for granted. Don't walk out of here, don't walk through this life thinking it doesn't matter. God is doing something in you, and it matters. You say, but yeah, my life is falling apart. I suppose that Daniel in the lion's den felt like things weren't really going that well. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego outside the fiery furnace probably didn't feel like things were doing that well. Esther, when they were trying to stamp out the Jews, didn't really feel like things were working in their favor too well. And over again, it goes in our lives. But when God is working, he's working. And we need to be like the wise men. Just because we see a plain old house and a poor family with a little child, we shouldn't miss our opportunity to worship him. Don't let your circumstances miss your Savior. Don't let it happen. Your Savior's there, and your Savior's working through your life. Let's stand together.